Yeah, today I kind of want to talk about. There's been a report that was released about JavaScript, the state of JavaScript in 2020, uh, and I know not everybody who watches my streams or watches my videos is really a JavaScript developer. A lot of you are Access developers or .NET developers, or maybe you're here for, you watch my Agile content, all that stuff on my Programming Made Easy channel. Maybe you come to this channel in order to watch some of the news. Sometimes I talk about politics. Right now, politics is very much a third rail and could possibly get me kicked off YouTube. So I'm trying to get more technical stuff and less politics. Obviously, there's a lot to talk over there about, what's going on with the industry, like Parler and Twitter and Facebook and Google and AWS and just overall there's a bunch going on over there. But right now it's so it's fraught with a lot of landmines if you say the wrong thing. So I'm not going to go on to that right now. Yes, I am gutless. I'm not going to get myself deplatformed or lose my job because of something I say on this channel. So, but I do want to talk about something that I think is relatively important and is something to keep an eye on because it's definitely. I want to talk about how the state of JavaScript, where it's at, and kind of this report. But I also want to talk about an overall problem that I see in the industry, and I think it's something that we definitely need to tackle. So stay tuned for that. All right, so what we've got today for you is the State of JavaScript report. And let me first start off with just kind of the article that sparked my interest in doing this for a topic today. And that was this one posted up by SD Times. This is one of the online magazines that I subscribe to so that I can kind of keep up to date on what's going on in technology. And I definitely recommend it. It's free. You don't have to. There is a sign up where you can sign up for the newsletter and stuff if you want to create an account and all that good stuff. But it is free to view and look at all these articles. So they were talking about how one of the upcomers that's coming up in the industry is Svelte. And I saw a presentation back at DevCon. Sorry, not DevCon. It was Dev Week. Sorry, Dev Week back last year in February. Went to Dev Week down in San Francisco, and there was a really great presentation done on Svelte. And it's very interesting technology. I don't want to dig too much into that. I'll show you a little bit about Svelte just so that you can kind of understand the context of this discussion. But overall, it seems like the state of things in JavaScript hasn't really changed all that much in 2020 over the last couple of years. There's some satisfaction surveys. Maybe there's a little bit of a bump for Angular in terms of popularity. But overall, it's kind of the same thing. So Svelte has a user base that is 89% satisfied. So they kind of jump right into this. The framework Svelte is establishing is starting to establish itself as a top contender for the top spot. I don't know that that's necessarily an accurate assessment, mostly because not just because you have something that's new and shiny doesn't mean it's going to get the adoption, right? How do you get something that has adoption? It's more than just bright and shiny. You have to have a big player that backs you. But anyway, Svelte has a user base that is 89% satisfied with it, which is a very high number, but also we'll find out that it's a very small portion of people who actually use it, which they do get into. Only 15% currently use it, which is a big increase from 2019 when only 8% used it. So there is a jump there. I mean, that's a pretty almost double your user base is a pretty substantial jump in terms of technology. So it definitely is something to keep your eye on. In comparison, React was used by 80% of respondents this year, and Angular was 56%, and Vue was 49%. So those are the three big players, right? React, Angular, and Vue. And React is now, I think, completely surpassed Angular at this point. I think React is the number one framework that most front-end developers are now using, despite the fact that I think Angular is probably a little bit more closer to what we typically use for constructs in back-end development. And that may very well be the distinction here, is that job descriptions, if you are a front-end developer, you're probably much more comfortable with writing just in pure JavaScript, and React tends to lean more pure JavaScript developer-ish. So if you're strictly a front-end developer, don't mess around with back-end. React is going to feel very comfortable. But if you're a back-end developer that doesn't do Python, but you're doing something like, Java or C#, then you're definitely going to feel more comfortable with Angular because of the incorporation of TypeScript and just kind of the constructs that we get, like, dependency injection, and having layers, having an actual layer, like an N layer system that allows you to think about where different things exist or the different behaviors that certain components are supposed to exhibit. Whereas React is just kind of a one, components do everything in React, but in Angular we have very specific things like modules and such. Anyway, so definitely React has kind of taken over the JavaScript world by storm. It's clearly in the number one spot. React is a good number two. And Vue has a lot of popularity. I know a lot of people who love Vue. The JavaScript frameworks Angular and Ember have seen major drop-offs in satisfaction over the years, according to the report. So drops in satisfaction for Ember and Angular. This has been an ongoing thing about dissatisfaction with Angular. And again, I don't know exactly where that comes from, because I think it's great. In 2016, 68% of developers were satisfied with Angular, dropping to 41% in 2018. So that's quite a bit. In a 2-year gap, it dropped 27% in popularity, in terms of satisfaction, I should say. That's pretty significant. And it continued to drop in 2019, even though there really weren't any significant changes to Angular. Angular hasn't really changed all that much over the past few years. It's like, if you learn Angular 2+, if you learned Angular 2, you pretty much can use Angular 6, 7, 8. There's really no distinction. There are some cool things that you can do. There's a lot of new technologies that they've added to Angular over those years, but essentially you can use it the same, which is kind of cool. React has had a lot of fluctuation, going from all functional components to then class-based components. Now they're kind of going back to just purely functional components. So there's a lot more fluctuation in React. So it's kind of weird to me that something as stable as Angular is, has decreased in popularity. I suppose the main culprit would be the size. Angular does tend to be a bit more on the bloated side, and they've tried to do some things to solve that, but that's probably the number one reason. If I was to take a guess as to why people are dissatisfied with Angular, it would be probably because of the size of the libraries that get generated. Okay, so similarly by the way, it did go back up to 42%. So basically 2018 to 2020 were about the same in terms of satisfaction for Angular. Similarly, in 2016, 47% of respondents said satisfied with Ember, decreased to 30% in 2019, and 27% of respondents in 2020. So Ember is on the way down. I don't personally know anybody who uses Ember. I know it exists. I've never used it myself. I've never seen anybody that uses it, but I know it exists. And I don't know. I just don't know any reason why anybody would pick it other than legacy at this point. Despite satisfaction dropping off, it hasn't seemed to affect the usage just yet, as 56% of respondents use Angular and 11% used Ember, which is consistent. Yeah, so it's basically consistent throughout the years. For the language overall, so the language JavaScript in total, a majority of respondents, 80%, agree that JavaScript is moving in the right direction. And that's something that I find is a very interesting statistic, that people believe that it's moving in the right direction. And we can talk maybe a little bit about some of the improvements that have occurred. There's some of that in the reports, or in the report here, that we'll talk about the state of 2020, state of JavaScript in 2020. But it does seem to be moving in the right direction, according to most people. Only 4% disagree. That's interesting. I think a lot of this, honestly, I think there's a lot of JavaScript fanboyish going on there. Just to be honest, I think there's just a lot of, JavaScript, they're happy to see it move on in some sort of direction. and they're just going to tag along to pretty much anything JavaScript does because that's their tool, right? All right. There was more of a split between those who believe building JavaScript apps is overly complex right now and those who don't. And this, I think, is also a very telling statistic. 39% said it was overly complex. Absolutely, I would be amongst that 39%. 26% were neutral and 24% disagreed. I can't see how anybody could disagree with the fact that it's very complex to write JavaScript apps nowadays. Okay, JavaScript developers overwhelmingly enjoy building apps using the language. 42% strongly agreed that they enjoyed building apps with JavaScript. 54% agreed. So that's, in total, that's what, 88.7%. So it's almost 90% of people agreed that they enjoyed building in JavaScript. That's interesting. And only 3.5% disagreed. In addition, a majority of developers wished JavaScript was their main programming language. Now, that's also very interesting. They wished that JavaScript was their main programming language. Now, remember, this is probably polling a bunch of JavaScript developers already. They're probably just upset that they have to use some other language for backend or something. You know, they're just tired of using something else for their APIs. Okay, I'm not going to read the quote or anything like that. Let's just take a look at the actual report. I find that this particular graph is quite interesting. This shows the it's quadrants here, and you can see it's broken up into have used and have not used. So have used is up above, have not used is down below, and then positive. So negative reaction over the left, negative opinion of it. Positive opinion of it on the right. So it's interesting when you start looking at, okay, I can have a positive impression or opinion of something I've never used before, such as GraphQL, right? GraphQL has kind of been on this very positive trend and more adoption. Same with Jest, right? Jest has had this very popular opinion of it, and it's grown, and now it's definitely being used more and more. You can see all of these items up here in the right. Look at TypeScript. That's an interesting, TypeScript has had pretty much a positive opinion from the get-go, and now a lot of people are using it. Webpack obviously is kind of the #1 source of building your projects. Redux has an interesting trajectory, had a lot of positivity to it, even amongst those who didn't use it. And it is trending backwards, which is not surprising, honestly. For anybody who's ever used Redux, it's fairly complex to set up and work with. So that's not entirely unimaginable. React is, look at this, it's just basically steady stream upwards. There really hasn't been much change in React. Then you look at Angular here, and Angular's trajectory has just been on the decline, yet still being widely adopted. That's interesting. Ember is definitely, most people don't use it and don't have a very good opinion of it. ClojureScript is just, don't know too many people that use that. Elm is kind of another one of those, not too often used. And MobX is one that I've used before. It's kind of a nice little library it's similar in a lot of ways to React in terms of its goals. But yeah, it's just not very well used. Gulp. Gulp has had a negative trajectory in terms of opinion, yet having wide adoption. So yeah, there's just a lot of interesting data that you can pull up here. And I'll definitely send a link in the description of this video so that you can take a look at both the article and the state of the 2020 technologies. I did want to talk real quickly about Svelte, just to give you kind of a quick idea of why people like it. So for those of you who've never had an introduction to Svelte, I'm not familiar with it. I don't write in Svelte. It's not really a technology I deal with right now. If it becomes more popular, then I'm sure I probably will have to deal with it. But here's a pretty good example of just the simplicity of what Svelte offers, is the ability to just simply have a script here, a script tag in your HTML document that just simply defines some simple JavaScript. And then you can use that. You could just kind of use this binding syntax to bind this count variable that you defined up here. This is a count variable you defined in JavaScript. You can say clicked and the number of times on this button. So here's this button. It's got a click handler. And this, when you click on the button, the click handler will be triggered, which is this handle click function. And you can bind it this way. So we're using these curly braces in order to bind the click event to this function. When the function is triggered, then we increase the count variable by 1, and we can display that count variable here, which again uses binding using curly braces. And then there's this option here. So this is also more binding. This just basically says, you know, if the count is equal to 1, then that means use the singular form of the word time. But if you have more than 1 or some other value other than 1, then you change the text to times. So you can see how this is very simple. It allows for this button that we see here, so that if I click on this, it just simply increases the count value for each one, and state is managed within the page. So Svelte is able to manage the state of the page just within this little bit of text here, which is really nice and comfortable. I think if I go back and so now we're back to 0 times. So notice that when I click 0 times, it says times here because it is not equal to 1. But as soon as I click on it once, notice that it changes it to time. So this is a very simplified version of this. You can just go to Svelte, and it's spelled with a T at the end. So svelte.dev. If you just go to their website, you can check it out. It's definitely worth, if you're at all interested in new technologies. Svelte is an interesting up-and-comer that I see the reason why people like it. This is a very easy syntax to deal with if you're a JavaScript developer. But I want to get into something more opinionated here. And that has to do with new. Everything just seems to be new. I remember I did a talk on Agile at a conference. It was a conference called MiniCon down in Tempe, Arizona. And I was asked to do a talk there. And I put one together on Agile. And I said, you know, this is the one that I'm thinking of doing is on Agile, and just kind of discussing, you know, Agile as a whole and why it applies to our operations, and what's a good way to implement Agile in your ecosystem and start working with it with your teams. And actually, I think I have this. Let me take a second here to pull this up. Which folder would I have put it under? I think it's this one. No, it's not there. Let me see if I can do this. Just bear with me here. I'm sorry. Is it this one? Would be an interesting one if this is it. Let me not. Yeah, so this was basically the talk. I posted it up. It is available here on my channel. Not this channel, but on Programming Made Easy. Yeah, I did do this talk. I recorded it and all that good stuff. It's on how you can kind of just do some easy overall view of what Agile is and why it's important to us. It's not a great talk. I'm not going to say like it's just one that everybody needs to go see because it's the most important thing you could ever watch, but it's covers the basics pretty well. And what was really kind of annoying about this is at the same time that I was giving a talk on Agile, someone next door was giving a talk on machine learning in Python. Which one of those do you think attracted the most people? Just which one of those two talks? Agile or machine learning in Python? Which one of those two things do you think attracted the most viewers in terms of people just sitting in the seats going to watch a talk? I don't think you'd be surprised that the answer was the machine learning in Python. And now take a guess about what percentage difference do you think it would be? Or what would be the ratio? How many people do you think sat in on my talk comparatively to that talk on machine learning in Python? It was probably around 50 to 1. I had 3 people, and the other room was completely full. People standing room. This is now. Look, it's not about me personally. Like in terms of that, and why that's upsetting to me is not a personal thing. It's not because nobody came to see my talk. Okay, I get it. Renee says 1 to 7. That I wish that it was that ratio. It was probably on the order of 1 to 40 to 1 to 50, and I mean standing room. It was packed, and maybe if we had different schedules where my talk was after or before, instead of being in 2 different rooms at the same time, maybe we would have had a different result from that. But that just goes to show how quickly this industry is to what's the bright shiny thing. What can I go learn that's brand new in the industry? I'll probably never actually use it in my lifetime, but yeah, let me just see the new bright shiny thing so I can learn about it. And I kind of understand the appeal. I really do. I do understand the appeal. I have to be in the industry of learning about the new things, learning about what is important. What is the new technology that's important to learn about because the industry is starting to adopt it. And I'll tell you that machine learning is not something that, as of right now, there are lots of great applications for machine learning, but if you're looking to get a job in the enterprise, machine learning is not the top skill that you need. It's not even in the top 20, okay? Machine learning is great, and I think there's a lot of great applications. If you're looking to get a job at Google or Amazon Web Services or Facebook or any of these big top talent companies, Microsoft, then by all means, go learn those things, because if you feel that is where you want your career to go, then go do those things. But at the same time, if Agile is like the way you work, the way that you conduct yourself as a professional, what are the important things that you should be trying to achieve in your own development career? And how should you behave? What should you aspire to be doing? And how can you be a better developer and accomplish your customers' needs in the most efficient, beneficial way, and provide the correct set of data for your employer so that you can show the progress that the team is making, right? These are the things that are probably the most important pieces of, well, maybe not the most important, maybe that's an exaggeration, but these are really highly important things for you to know, and you should be valuing. But who's learning about them? We hear the word agile, and it's on nearly every job application that you go apply for nowadays, right? It's agile this, agile that. I'm really satisfied in seeing a lot more TDD in a lot of job requirements, or extreme programming. I'm seeing a lot of that now, like way more than I saw in the past in terms of what enterprises are expecting you to know about. Yet nobody's going to those talks on those topics. They're going to the new bright shiny thing. When I did my Dev Week talk on dependency injection in React, I had standing room. It was full because I was doing something that nobody else was doing. It was very interesting. It was a very interesting topic. But at the same time, I wanted to do something that I thought was important to help make them better developers, not just simply the new bright shiny, let's talk about Svelte or let's talk about whatever. But that's the direction of the industry. And I understand that these paths may be fairly worn, and that's why some people don't have the same pull to them. But at the same time, I think that the topic of Agile, the topic of how you do your job and how you conduct yourself, that's inexhaustible. That is something that you should be in a constant refinement mode. You should be constantly looking for ways to improve both you and how you behave, but also how the team organizes, how the team behaves. So, my efforts have been a lot, recently, my efforts have been more in the direction of making better developers, Just how do you become a better developer? How do you do things better? Solid principles, functional paradigms versus object-oriented paradigms, talking about those differences and distinctions. How do you write code using asynchronous methods? How do you, those are some of the technical implications, but then there's things like implementing a CI/CD pipeline, having in extreme programming, we have a 10-minute build and we have nightly builds. Renee says, I think project planning foundationally is so important because if you can't plan out a project and can't learn to adjust deliverables, you can't succeed. That's absolutely right. If you don't know how to go about doing a project, then you're leaving a lot of empty areas in your own development career that you're never going to be able to cross. If you don't know how to be a better developer and how to inform your management with your own progress, you are going to be constantly stifled. You are not going to be able to grow. You can be the most proficient developer, but if your boss doesn't understand what you're doing, you're not going to go anywhere. Okay, you have to be able to communicate. You have to be able to take and understand the statistics and the values that they are looking for, the business objectives, and how do you project the work that you're doing onto a business objective? How do you translate the work you're doing into a customer-related value? Those are the types of things that you have to be constantly thinking about, while that's very rarely what actually gets discussed or concerned. And as I work with a lot of teams, I've worked with teams that have this problem, and it's something I see pretty universally, is that they're so focused on the technical requirements of the job that they have that they don't think about the communication piece. They don't think about how they're going to communicate back up the chain from where they are, okay? And that's a huge gap. That's a huge hole that exists in our industry. And it's one of the most important things that you can do for yourself to make yourself a better developer, is to learn how to communicate back to business about the work that you are doing. But when you do these presentations, when you try to do these videos, when I have agile videos, I have a lot of videos that I post up on my Programming Made Easy channel, and they're the least watched. They're the ones that nobody wants to watch. And I have a hard time understanding maybe why. Maybe it's I got to be a better communicator about it. Maybe I have to make the subject more exciting. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it's definitely a trend in the industry that people do not care about how they do their job. They only care about what they get to do. And that is a major, major problem that must be solved, because if it's not, then we're going to continue having this disconnect. Why do I think that this is such a dangerous thing? Why do I think that having this disconnect between developers and business objectives, why do I think that that's so important? There's obviously the personal thing, right? Where if I can communicate better about what my objectives are about what I'm doing, the work I'm doing, and how it impacts the business objectives, that's definitely an important thing. But what's even more important from a 10,000-foot look at the industry as a whole is that as businesses have objectives, and a lot of those objectives can relate to safety and security. And that is where the biggest, whenever there is a bug in safety and security, whenever we're talking about a bug that kicks off some sort of risk that doesn't have a correct compensation for, that can cause a business to completely fold. Okay, this is not just a hypothetical either. If you go look at Knight Capital and what happened there, that was a programming instance that actually caused a company to go bankrupt in less than an hour. Okay, a programming bug caused a multi-million-dollar company to go under it was like 40 minutes, in less than an hour. So there's a lot of risk in what we do. And in organizations, businesses, what they want to do is they want to keep putting these controls on us and putting imposing these gates that protect them so that the work that we do does not hurt them. And that is coming directly from the fact that they don't understand us. They don't understand the work that we do. All they know is they have business objectives and they want you to achieve them. And in order to protect them from you not accomplishing those things or putting something in their system, eventually those fingers are going to get pointed to us more regularly when things go wrong. Okay. Uncle Bob does a talk on this all the time, and I think it's one worth discussing, where Volkswagen is the prime example of this. Volkswagen they had the diesel scam where they were programming it so that the engine was performing in a different way when it was when it was getting smog tested, but when it was taken off of the testing, it would just kind of emit all sorts of stuff. And so it was passing on in the tests, but when it was going in the open road, it was intentionally failing. And they were able to do this based upon programming, right? They were able to write this program that was basically watching some of the sensors of the vehicle to know when it was under test conditions, the speed of the acceleration, the speed of the vehicle, the acceleration leading up to the vehicle. They figured out that when you're on a dynamometer, the steering wheel stays in one place, right? It's not, the wheels aren't going to turn all over the place. So if the steering wheel is locked and you go up to a certain speed and you maintain it, and there's certain increments that they go up, being able to know all of that data, you can cause the program to say, okay, let's change the performance of the engine so that while we're on this, we are performing in a particular way. But then once we get out on the road, we throw all that away and we can do whatever with the engines. It can perform however we want it. And they did that, and that's how they got away with a lot of things at Volkswagen. Now, it wasn't until Volkswagen had its road tested. There was I don't know if it was the EPA or who it was, but they did a road test on this vehicle because they thought it was so amazing how this vehicle could have such low emissions. And they discovered that, they were cheating the system this way because they did an actual road test. They took it out and captured it that way. There's only like 3 of these road capturing systems out there in the US. So they found it, right? They discovered it, and they went to court, and obviously this caused a major problem because, VW got sued by both the United States and the EU. One of the interesting things, and what I'm getting to here, is when I think it was the vice president of North America operations of Volkswagen was brought before the Congress, a committee, a congressional committee. He was asked, how did this happen? And his response was, some programmers did it for some reason. Some developers did it for some reason. That was his answer. And I'm not kidding. Like that's not me summarizing. That is actually what he said. Some programmers did it for some reason. Now, that's Volkswagen directly pointing the finger at us. And to Uncle Bob's perspective, what he's talking about there is kind of a morality. What is a standards? What is a standard that we as developers hold ourselves to? And there isn't one, right? If you want to be a lawyer, you have to pass the bar, but then you can have your license revoked by the bar, right? The bar can take your license away. If you're a doctor, your doctor's license can be taken away. There's all of these industries that require licensing in order to practice a particular profession. We don't have that in our industry. We don't have any sort of body that protects us and says these are the moral standards. These are the standards by which we force ourselves to adhere to. And because we don't have those standards, it means that we can continue to get away with doing our work this way, where we don't have to think about how we conduct ourselves, because there's no board that we would have to defend ourselves against. I wrote my code this way because this was the most beneficial way. It was the one that achieved the objectives the best, or I was doing these practices in order to ensure the quality of my work, but it turns out there was just a failing of the practice, or there was there's no defense that you can give because no one's asking you to defend. No one's forcing you to be a better developer. There's no force upon us to be good developers other than keeping our jobs. And that criteria just simply means that whatever our bosses tell us to do, we do. So all we ask them for is, okay, give us the requirements. Tell us what you want us to build. Give us the inputs and the outputs of the system. And from their perspective, from management perspective, they don't really know how to talk about these things in such a way that we are going to understand them, or vice versa. We don't talk about the technology in a way that business understands it. If I was to say, yeah, I'm using dependency injection to handle all of my services and using an n-layer architecture, business is just going to go, they don't have a clue. They don't understand any of that. So how do you communicate? Since we don't have a standards body, since we don't have this a way for our license to practice taken away from us, then that means that we have to find a way to better achieve the goals of the business. And the only way to better achieve the goals of the business is to talk a language that the business and developers can share, and have a set of objectives that the business and developers share. And Agile is a way of the developers telling business, hey, these are our goals and our objectives. So just kind of, and I'm gonna kind of leave it on this. I'm gonna pop this up, and no, that's not right. I want to do left monitor. Just to kind of give you an idea. So Agile just has these core values. Let me present here. Okay. So those are the 4 values of Agile, right? Individuals, interactions, working software, customer collaboration, responding to change. Now, I don't want to blow past the fact that the things on the right are also important, but the things on the left are more important. Okay. But the thing is, if you look at what these values are, it's a way of developers telling business that this is our set of goals and also how we want to work, right? So that we can be in alignment with the business objectives. This is what we want, and this is how it can help the business, right? We want these individuals and interactions that can help us as developers be better developers, because we can work with others to understand the problems. Working software, that should be the ultimate goal. That is the goal that hopefully the business objectives are and our goals are. We want working software. That should be priority number 1, right? Is having this working software. Customer collaboration. We want to make sure we're communicating with the customer on a regular basis because we want customer satisfaction. And we know that the only way we can deliver customer satisfaction is to collaborate with them, not just do this, give us the requirements, we do something and then release it 6 months later. We know that doesn't work. We know that that's a bad path. Yet businesses quite often give us this objective of, here's this giant project. We want you to have it done in 6 months. How many people do you need? That's not the right way to do it. We know that there has to be a collaborative effort in order to achieve the goals that the customer really wants. And then finally, the responding to change is once again an objective that both the business and the customer should want. And also us as developers, we should be writing our code so that it is able to be adjusted and modified on the fly and adjusts to the changing requirements that we get. The business should want to be able to have the software constantly be adjusting to the customer's needs. And the customer should always want to be able to adjust the software to meet their needs, right? There's these core values that we're saying, as a developer, we want to work in this way, but also here are the goals that we want. And if that's not an important thing for everybody to adhere to, like if this isn't the moral standard, I don't know what else could be the quote unquote moral standard. If there was a governing body, if there was a board that we had to defend our actions against, and this was their criteria, it would make pretty good sense as a criteria. This may not be perfect. In fact, I think the software craftsmanship is probably a little bit closer to that bar. But this is a start. This is where we can start with that conversation of, this is what we know the customer wants to achieve, and this is how we can achieve it. These are the types of things that we need to be doing. And if we're not doing these things, then that means that we're moving further and further away from those goals. So this is just a template, a medium, if you will, for how we can communicate with the business what their objectives are and how we can achieve them, right? That's what this outlines. If that isn't one of the most important things we do as software developers, aside from the actual programming and ensuring that the quality of the product is there, I don't know what other things could possibly be more important. Do you really think that me as a developer, if I know that I'm probably never going to use machine learning in any part of my career at this point, would I be better served going to, and I don't do a lot of Python, so would it make sense for me to go to that talk on machine learning in Python? Or would I need to go to this talk on Agile? Which one is more impactful on my career? Which one is going to propel me? Which one is more important for our industry? Right? Which one is more impactful to our industry? Learning how to do machine learning in Python, or how do you conduct yourself as a developer in the business environment? Which one of those things is going to be more important to the industry overall? And which one do you suppose people are going to and listening to? That is such a problem. I don't know how to fix it. And I'm open to, and I'm probably going to close it on that because I don't know what the answer is. I don't know, is doing more of these talks the right answer? The problem is most of these organizations that arrange these talks don't do agile discussions or extreme programming or Kanban or lean manufacturing. Most of them don't really invite those kind of discussions or talks because they're not the bright, shiny thing. Renee says there needs to be a go-between that understands coding well enough and understanding predictable business needs to explain needs and progress back and forth between dev team and management. I do agree with that. And the methodology that I've been trying to invent, if you will, I've been slowly implementing it in certain places, but this idea of extreme agile, where you have a technical lead that is communicating and pulling the requirements directly from either the business or the customer, that's definitely one way of solving that, of bridging that gap between the developers and the customer needs. Domain-driven design is another one of those philosophies that's out there that I think is really good and worth, if you want to spend some time learning how to do domain-driven design, that is definitely worthwhile. The book by Eric Evans is worth a good read. And it helps kind of map over the business needs and the client needs over to some sort of model that the development team can work with. That's a very good thing to do. Renee says that person could be the chair of an ethical coding board. Yeah, an ethical coding board. I wonder, should we set something up? If we set something up as our own internal organization, a developer organization that says, an ethical coding board. I don't know how many developers are going to want to attach to that. That might be worthwhile doing, but by all means, that very well could be worthwhile doing. And maybe that's the work that we need to do, is to set up some sort of ethical coding board that says are you adhering to Agile and software craftsmanship, right? And setting up some standards for that. That might very well be worthwhile. And probably wouldn't be too bad to kind of consult with, say, the bar and see how are they setting up their regulations or kind of researching that to kind of come up with some parallels in our industry. See what they're doing that's so successful and what we could do in our industry. The thing is, I think there's going to be a ton of resistance. I think there's just going to be a lot of resistance to that idea. Just this idea in general of some sort of board that can take away your license to practice development. I think if you did it if you aligned that organization with enterprise and said, a company, let's align ourselves with organizations and enterprises. That what we do as a governing board is to kind of validate or vet your developers to ensure that they are doing the proper practices, that they're doing the right kind of quality code. And in order for them to work for your organization, they have to pass our examinations. That might be where you start that effort and grow it. But I don't think that a organically grassroots version of this would work, because there would just simply be too much resistance against it, I think. We tend to be very free-spirited as developers. We want to do whatever we want. We don't really like having regulations or anybody telling us what we can or cannot do, or how we can or cannot do our job. As we can see, that's one of the reasons people don't attend the Agile talks, because they don't like being told how to do their job. They think they already know how to do it. Renee says, LOL, that was my first thought too, but I think it can't hurt to throw it out there. Well, that was about quality coding abroad. About I'm not sure. Some typos there. Yeah, I just think it would be good to have a board, but at the same time, it would be a bad thing to have a board, because you're going to have a ton of resistance against it. I don't know that I would want to either. I'm just thinking about my experience with the PGA of America, for example. And I really do probably need to end the stream after I give this little parallel here. Some of you may or may not know I used to be I used to be a golf instructor. I passed the PGM, which is you have to golf a certain level. You have to achieve a certain set of scores in order to get into to complete the program, in order to become a PGA professional. And I passed that, no problem. But then there's books and there's all this college stuff that you essentially have to do. You have to take about 6 years worth of education and doing this book work in order to complete it. And then every 2 years you had to go down, at least when I was in the program, this was how it worked. Every 2 years you had to go down to Orlando and go through this schooling for I think it was like 3 days. So 2 or 3 days, I can't remember. But you had to basically pass all the tests while you were there. So you do this education on site, working under a Class A professional. You do all your book work. Then you go and take the test down in Orlando, and you had to fly down there. Then, another 2 weeks on this new set of books. Then you do another, round of testing 2 years later. And then you do for three times you had to do that before you could get approved. And you had to be approved by the PGA of America board. Like, there was a board that said whether or not you could be a Class A professional, whether or not you could actually achieve that level of saying, I am a professional. And the thing about this was, if that board didn't approve of your application, you weren't one. So you could go through 6 years of education and spend all of this money going through the program, only to have your approval denied by this board for whatever reason that they wanted to do. And it doesn't really happen very often that they reject an applicant, but just that idea that you can spend all that time studying and educating yourself and achieving it and passing all the scores and then still be rejected by this board, that's kind of problematic. And I assume that there's some of that also with lawyers and doctors. We often typically think about these boards as being, if you pass them, or if they withdraw your license, you must have done something terrible. But that's not always the case. Quite often it's, financial obligations that they can't achieve. There's lots of different reasons why doctors and lawyers have their licenses revoked that have nothing to do with their professionalism. And so I don't know that we want to go into that kind of system. There's some good things about it. There's some bad things about it. The good things about it would be that we hold ourselves to some sort of standard in terms of morality or our quality of work and craftsmanship that we do. That's definitely worth a look at. But at the same time, I think we're just too independent. We're too, freedom-loving as developers. We like to be able to just hack away at things and do whatever we want and not have anybody tell us how to do it. It's kind of the exploratory, the fun of being a software developer is exploring all the different ways to do something. So having some sort of board tell us what we can or cannot do. Yeah, I just don't know that that's gonna fly with too many people. But there does need to be something. There does need to be something. I think we need to start holding ourselves accountable to this, and maybe that's the answer, is holding ourselves accountable and pushing back on management when they try to infringe upon our craftsmanship, our quality, our development practices. And that's kind of the direction Uncle Bob goes with his talks, is we need to push back on that. We need to push against, we need to tell them the truth. We need to tell business the truth as soon as we possibly can. Renee says, maybe the agile process needs to include a quality code committee that signs off on the app. I think you could probably set up an organization that has a quality measurement, that an organization, an enterprise could then bring that company along to approve of the application. I think to a certain extent we already have that in some ways. We have a lot of consultants that are in the industry that validate the quality, and we can have third-party independent validations. Like, for example, the voting systems that we have in America. And don't get me started on this. I don't want to go too far into this, but there are audits that are done on the software before something as important as voting can possibly be implemented. Voting system has to go through all these regulatory steps. So, and one of those is obviously an audit of the system, and somebody inspects the code and all that good stuff. But that still doesn't get to what I think is essentially the process. That's just looking at and inspecting the code to check out the quality. That doesn't necessarily get us to the behaviors of the software developers. So there might be some room in there. I know that in my industry, what I do is I do not just software development instruction, but also coaching the teams on how they can organize and how they can conduct themselves in a better manner. That's something that I do with Galvanize, is improving the business process and how the teams convey what they're doing. And there's definitely a need for that. And my company, Galvanize, that's our niche in a lot of ways, is helping improve the quality of the way these teams work and behave together. So there's definitely something there, but I think it's worthwhile at least having the discussion of, do you have some sort of quality board? Do you have some sort of certification of the developers themselves, that they understand these concepts of agile well enough that they know when a business is asking them to cross the line? A lot of developers that I run into don't know how to have that discussion. They know something is wrong. They know that business is asking them to do something, and they kind of snicker and sneer at the requests that the businesses give them. But they don't know how to have the conversation about how to push back against that. They don't think that they have the power to push back against that. And maybe in a lot of cases they don't. And if there was such a board that said, this is the quality of craftsmanship that software developers have to be held responsible for, then if the business tried to push beyond tried to cross that line, then the developers would have a line in the sand that they could say, this is the quality that I have to hold myself to, or else I get my license taken away, or else I get decertified, or something like that. Unless that exists, it's a little difficult for developers to give any sort of pushback to what management is asking them for. So right now it's an individual responsibility, right? It's an individual responsibility to hold yourself to these things, yet so few people actually even know what that means. And even fewer people will actually take the ownership and do the pushback and actually say, no, I won't do it this way. We've got to do this better. Very few people are actually wanting to say that. Renee says, maybe the agile process needs to include a quality committee. Oh, yeah, that's right. So sorry, I already read that. Okay. Thanks for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. It's been about an hour long. I hope that you guys liked it. I'm glad to be back. I don't know, again, how many times I'm going to be able to do these things. I'm very, very busy. My job just keeps me very busy. I love my job. My job is fantastic. I get to talk about all these things that I'm talking to you about right now. So you're getting a little bit of insight about some of the stuff we discuss when I'm working with an organization. Speaking of which, if you are interested in hiring us, Galvanize, we are consultants. We do enterprise, but there are some minimums there. So I don't know. I can get you in touch with the right salespeople if you're interested. If you have a very large corporation, you're looking to improve your business processes and improve the quality and do some sort of digital transformation. That is really what we are in the business of doing, is the digital transformation to an agile, mostly extreme programming process. But anyway, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and take care. Thanks for watching me on this.